Good morning, North Lakes, and welcome to our YouTube channel. So glad that you joined us. We are continuing our message series on soul detox, looking at some of the influences, the negative, toxic influences from our world, and figuring out how we might be able to filter some of those out. So today, we are reviewing our last week's message, and today we're talking about soul detox, radioactive relationships. This is a toughie. We started our time together at North Lakes Church with some table talk questions. And so here are some table talk questions that we ask people to sit around tables and have a bit of a chat about. And so I'm going to read them for you. You're welcome to pause the video after I say these questions and have a discussion more about those things. First table talk question is, do you have friendships with people that are really difficult to get along with, and what makes it hard? Secondly, who is the difficult one in your family? You don't have to name them, but what is it that makes it hard to get along with that difficult member of your family? And number three, we love unhealthy people, but we do find it hard. What is the hardest thing about loving people that are unhealthy? And then lastly, the Bible says bad company corrupts good character. And what do you think the Bible means by that statement? So you're welcome to pause the video now, have a little bit of discussion or a thought. If you're by yourself, you can think through those. If you're watching this with others, you're welcome to pause the video and kind of have a think about that. Well, welcome back. I hope you had some good discussion. I hope you had some opportunities to talk about difficult relationships that you might be experiencing. I just want to ask, do you have someone in your life that encourages you and lifts you up and leads you closer to positive things and your relationship with Jesus? If you do, that is awesome. You know the impact that has on you. On the other hand, you might spend a lot of time around someone who takes you in the opposite direction. And that's what we're going to talk about today. These toxic folks in your life that bring negative influences in your life. Perhaps that person is you. Perhaps you're the toxic influence in someone else's life. I hope not. If you are, then maybe there might be some good things that you could change about that part of your life. But you are familiar, I'm sure, with those people who make your life challenging, and they make life challenging for everyone around them. They're angry, they're negative, defensive, detached, petty, delusional, sullen, whiny, bitter, or baffling. Maybe they're critical, or all of the above. We have all had to deal with this type of toxin, and perhaps even been this kind of toxin ourselves at certain points in our life. The people closest to you will hands down be your greatest asset or your worst spiritual curse. So how do we balance that? How do we know how much influence, how much contact we have with those people? Or maybe how do we figure out when it's time to call those relationships quits? Where's that line for us? You might think it doesn't really matter who you spend time with. You know, you're your own person. It doesn't matter if you spend time with people who bring a lot of negative influences into your life. You might say to yourself, they don't control me. I can do what I want, and they don't influence me. But, you know, it is important to love everyone and to do your best to influence other people's lives for the good. But oftentimes, if we're spending the majority of our time with toxic people, oftentimes they bring us down to their level before we have the time to encourage and love them and bring them up. 1 Corinthians 15:33 does say, bad company corrupts good morals. And it sounds like a no-brainer. That makes sense that would happen. Hanging around toxic people can make us sick. However, real life relationships are hard. Some of these people that we're talking about that bring negative, toxic influences into our lives, sometimes they're family members, sometimes they're uh, people that we love dearly. Sometimes they're people that we're actually trying to have a romantic connection or relationship with. And so these things aren't easy. Um, maybe we work with them, they're in our family, or maybe they're just the person that we're closest to. So that complicates things so much. Um, in Timothy, 2 Timothy 2:16 and 17, it says, "But avoid worldly and empty chatter, for it will lead to further ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene." Paul encourages Timothy, someone who he was mentoring, that we need to watch who we hang out with and what we talk about. The wrong kinds of relationships can corrupt us, pollute us, they can infect us. They can rot and destroy our good character. And this is not a phenomenon that only affects Christian people, but it affects everyone. How many of you have been in a relationship that is taking you down a path that you didn't want to go? Oftentimes we don't even notice that we've gone down that path till it's almost too late. And we have a really hard time trying to figure out how we got there. It's very, very difficult, this topic. Sorry, I hope maybe you've grabbed a cup of coffee today. Maybe you're joining me with a bit of a cupper. There's some common types of people that are toxic and bring toxic things and negative things into those relationships. And I put them in 3 different categories. And they can be found everywhere. They can be found in families, offices, schools, our work environments, our churches, our neighborhoods. They're everywhere. Let me just highlight them really quick. First of all, there are the chronic critics. And these are people who can find fault in everything. Things are too hot, too cold, too rainy, too dry. The weather's always bad. My car's always bad. They pick at the scab. The church service is too dull or too exciting. The meal is not what I ordered. The movie was boring and stupid. The bad acting and predictable plot. On and on and on. Day after day, it's the same. Yada, yada, yada. The chronically negative person wears on you day after day after day. Criticism, judgment, gossip. Those are the toxic influences that the chronic critic infects us with. Then there are, secondly, the controllers. And those are the people who are controlling and overbearing. They force their way and their opinions upon us, regardless of our own thoughts. You always go to their favorite places, and they are always choosing, and they choose everything, and you don't ever get a chance to choose. People in churches over the history of the church, they have been particularly bad at this, being controlling over people, not loving. And may I just say, if you're in a relationship with a controller, you might feel like you're losing your own identity. And I just want to warn you, if you're in that kind of a relationship, run. The sad thing is that this type of toxin is what we have seen in relationships over and over again that have been really destructive. And as I say, Christians have been notorious at this over the history of time, not really knowing how to properly love people. The third one is the tempter. And I'm sure you know this kind of person. You might have these kinds of folks in your life. This type encourages you to do the wrong things that you know you shouldn't. Most of the time they know you shouldn't, but they tempt you anyway. It could be someone you're in a relationship with, or it might be a buddy who makes it their whole goal to get you to do something or say something that you would never do. You might have spent, they wish you to fail. You might have spent a long time quitting something, a habit, a bad habit that you didn't want in your life that was really negative. Perhaps you've worked really, really hard on it. You've disciplined yourself to quit that habit. And then you have people in your life that spend all their time trying to drag you back in to that habit. That can be a very destructive force in your life. These are all very toxic and negative influencers in your life. So how do we handle that? Well, it's really fairly simple to say. but it's very, very difficult to do. First of all, our first step is to build good fences. Sorry, I'm just going to have another little drink. We have to notice whether we're involved in a relationship that brings with it those negative toxins. And if we do, and they begin to affect you in a very negative way, that poison slowly seeping into your soul, don't panic. The good news is that God loves you, and that God loves that toxic person. And the Bible is full of life-giving illustrations on how to heal some of those types of relationships. But the first step in the process is setting some clear and healthy boundaries. You know, when a station owner out in the outback builds a fence, you know, they build a fence for a purpose. They are trying to keep the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. Boundaries help us to enjoy the good without being destroyed by the bad. In other words, we can still have a relationship with people and try to do our best to love and encourage them, but those boundaries help us to keep the bad stuff away from us so that it doesn't affect us, but we still are seeking for those good things to be present in that relationship. Jesus did the same thing when he encountered people. There were certain people that he had to create some boundaries around. One of them were some of the religious leaders of the day. He was actually, he especially created boundaries with those religious leaders. And he even had to put them in their place a few times. And even one of his closest friends, when Peter went up to Jesus and he was saying some things that that were particularly negative and toxic to what Jesus wanted to do. Matthew 16:23, it says he turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me, for you're not setting my mind on God's interest, but you're more interested in man's interest." His boundary was strong. He said to his closest friend, "Get behind me. Stop talking to me." And look, I don't recommend that you go out and tell your grandma, "Get behind me, Satan." But we do have to be willing to set up these boundaries so that we can be stronger and better and more healthy, and our soul can be alive and not be affected by these negative influence. And it leads us to much, much better mental health. The more negative, toxic influences that come into our souls, it really affects our thinking. It affects how we think about ourselves, how we think about others around us. So, look, again, I don't recommend you saying to people, "You're from Satan, you're a terrible person," but build some boundaries up. That's that first kind of step into protecting and filtering out those negative things. So let me give you a couple of hints when you're doing this. First of all, tell people. Don't be afraid to actually say to people, "I won't let you talk to me or treat me that way." You just plainly tell someone that you're not going to participate in those negative things that they're bringing up. Maybe they're a gossip. Maybe they trash talk about other people. Hold your ground and say, "Look, I really don't want to be a part of that negative, toxic talk." And remember, if they're going to do it about other people, they're probably doing it about you as well. So keep out of it. Don't be a part of that. Don't let someone pull you down. Set your standards and stay strong. It will be hard at first, but the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. So build that boundary. Hint number 2 as you're building that boundary is not only in things that you hear, but simply say, "I'm not going to go with you there." Some of your friends decide to cross the border to toxic town. You don't have to join them. If you have a problem with alcohol, then clearly there are places that you should stay away from. The same with anything. You might have trouble with any toxic thing or toxic behavior. Then there's going to be places and things you simply do not want to be exposed to. And so you have to be able to be strong with that boundary and say, I'm not going with you there. I'll go with you on a walk, or I'll go with you here, or I'll go with you here, but I can't go there because that's too much. I don't want to be exposed to those things. So build a boundary and only participate in those things that are good for you and good for the people around you. And the last thing, look, building boundaries is not simple. It takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of strength and courage. So I'll be praying for you if you have to start building some of these boundaries. I've had to do it in my life many times, and it is difficult. One of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. But this last part is probably as difficult, if not more difficult, and that is sometimes you have to cut to the quick. And as harsh as this sounds, this is that extreme situation. The extreme take home from this lesson is that if you hang with someone or have a toxic person you're in a relationship with, and you establish some healthy boundaries, but that person continues not to recognize those boundaries or respect those boundaries, they continue to abuse or criticize or threaten or tempt or harm you, it's time to do the right thing at that point and to sever that relationship. Perhaps maybe even get a hold of a third party. If it's a marriage relationship, it's time to actually get that third party involved in the form of counseling and be able to kind of come together and work these things out, because obviously it's becoming so toxic that you can't work that out yourselves. It's very important to do that. It's very, very important that you understand the seriousness and toxicity of the behavior of people around you. So, if someone is sending you rude or explicit messages, cut to the quick. Don't just put up with it. Cut them off. Do something drastic. Block them. Tell an adult if you're a child. If it is really bad, then let the authorities know. If you're married and someone at work is constantly tempting you or flirting with you, then that is playing with fire. Exit the building. Report them. Ask for a transfer. Run. Don't just put up with it and think that it's something that's innocent, because those toxic kind of behaviors can really lead to something a lot more serious. So don't just put up with it. Cut them off. Don't have any contact with them. If they can't respect, if they can't respect the marriage relationship and someone else's relationship, then they're too toxic for us to be around. Look, I've dealt with this myself. It's really, really difficult, but those are the seriousness of those kind of connections and influences. You really have to cut those things off. If you're dating someone that is controlling every aspect of your life and you're feeling like you're losing yourself, dump them, break up with them, drop them. Do yourself a favor. Why would God want you to marry or date someone who doesn't value you and see your worth and want to bring the best out in you? The controlling person, the toxic controlling person, is a really, really dangerous person to get involved with. So don't be afraid to protect yourself. And again, this is a last resort when these things are very, very serious. So this is a last resort warning. Before you start blasting all these people with your laser gun and cutting off things with people completely, just reminding you that those things are a last resort. Proverbs 12:26 says, "The righteous choose their friends carefully." And so I would just leave you with that today. We have to approach this topic very, very carefully and know we have to use our wisdom and understanding to be able to recognize those toxic behaviors in those people. And we have to redefine how we filter those things out. Again, we are seeking to be spiritually healthy people. And if you want to bring God's healing love to a world of people who are sick and lost and hurting, then we have to be willing to start filtering these things out. So thank you for listening today. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for coming to our YouTube channel. Look out for more messages in the future. And we invite you to join us at church. We do meet at North Lake Subdivision at the Cameron Park Community Center. From 9 to 10, we have coffee. From 10 to 10:40 or so, we have worship and communion. And then our message will start after that. So come for all or part of that. We'd love to get to know you more and walk this walk with you. And thank you for tuning in.